It's a pretty warm October here, 2021, and since I've been discussing hidden history of the Grove, at least my personal background history with it, um, I wanted to continue this with something that was mentioned in the last one with George Jaros. So back in October of 1996, when I had first recorded some of that anomalous footage on a VHS camcorder, I started telling some friends about it, and friends were actually telling friends about it. So it kind of stirred up a little bit of interest in the place among us. And I had a friend who worked at the local cable company. I think it was called Time Warner at the time. And he worked for the like the Channel 3, Channel 4, public access studio kind of stuff. So before we were rudely interrupted, so he's at the public access studio. Works late nights sometimes there, does whatever his tasks were, and I brought the VHS tape over to him, popped it in the system, and reviewing it, and he thought it was kind of odd, but I guess whatever to him in some ways, like, yeah, it is odd. I've never seen that stuff before. And through him though, I used to hear about this guy named George that used to hang around, and so George Jaros, who was mentioned in a previous video of having a University of Illinois hosted website when he was going to school there, which became, like, for some reason a little popular with the Grove, and you were looking up stuff online back in the day, probably because there was very little information anyway. So it was this guy at the cable studio who passed this information along to George. Apparently George has an interest in the paranormal, and late one night, it was just so odd. This is the first time I actually got to speak to George. He's knocking on my door. And we're talking probably, I think at the time it was 11 o'clock at night. I forget. And it could have been 9 o'clock. I just don't remember. I just know it was late at night. And the first time I'm talking to this guy, he's like, Joel, that was the guy I was at the cable company. He's like, Joel told me to, stop on by and just say hello. He said, you'd be okay with this? I'm like, yeah, hey, what's up, and he's like, well, I heard you like to go to Bachelors Grove, and I don't have anybody to go with. I was hoping you'd want to come with me, And I'm like, well, I guess so. It's cool. I mean, I already knew about the guy. I knew he was cool and whatever, but it's just kind of odd, right? Just out of nowhere. This guy's knocking on my door. Now, I used to be able to park by the pond. That's long gone. So we come out here, we park by the pond, and then we come along the trail that's between the creek and the pond. And we never actually got busted that night, miraculously. But that was kind of a party spot sometimes for people to park back in the day, and sometimes the cops just wouldn't bother you if they knew who you were. So maybe that's what it was. But so we come back here, and the reason he picked the night was that it was extremely warm, and there was like no wind. Even kind of right now, this would be considered high wind. Look at all the leaves behind me, barely even moving. So it was one of these unique, warm, windless nights for the windy city. And we get through the little hole in the fence by the pond to come in, and probably a dozen feet in, just this high gust, like somebody turned on a commercial Hollywood fan, those big circular ones, and it just boom, just high, super high. And it was just real brief, that second or two, whatever it was, and then done. Now we both looked at each other, we're like, that was, quote, pretty fucked up. Yeah, what was that all about? And I do remember, I don't know if George does, I haven't spoken to him in years, but I remember my exposed skin being just icy cold for a moment. Looking back on the weather for that day, it was in the 60s at night, maybe close to 70. I forget what it was when I was looking it up. So it was kind of warm, and this was on November 6th. So yeah, pretty warm for November. And so we go through this little experience, and then we just say, oh, whatever, we chalk it off, and we start walking around. Eventually, we depart ways, just kind of walk around the cemetery. And part of this is that interests me is, like, science likes repeatability. You can just keep repeating the results, seeing if you're getting the same thing, right? So there's kind of an analogy here to this. And as I walk around, I reach a point in the southeast portion of the cemetery, William Hamilton grave, little tiny one, and it was dug up probably about, I don't know, 2 feet, something like that, maybe a little deeper. Got to throw in a photo for it. And I remember the top of the soil was just a little bit dry, but most of it was wet. And I thought, man, these people might still be here. So I tell them about it. I'm like, we got to be careful. There might still, somebody might still be back here. And we just kind of brushed it off at that point, though. And he's off doing his thing with the 35 millimeter camera, one of those little automatics. And I got this big VHS camcorder on my shoulder, which was absolutely pointless. There was no Sony night shot effects. So we're talking pitch black recording. Stupid, right? But it served a very important function this night. So as I'm walking around, and then when I remember these details, I tell people, like, I kind of forget how many times I looped around, I guess. But that's just how it goes. Sometimes I forget dates and times and little shitty details like that. So I'm walking around the cemetery, going in my loops, and I get near this one spot, and the camera powers down. Now this VHS camcorder had a button on the top, so you're holding it down here, the power button on the top. When you slide, you have to physically slide this button. When it powers down, you'll hear the VHS tape. The gears will start moving into a relaxed position, and then it finally turns off. So I hear the gears, I hear it shutting off. I'm like, what's going on? And I had already charged these packs. I always keep ready to go because I was a camera geek. I guess still am. And, I'm thinking, okay, well, I split shot a pack and nothing's happening. I'm thinking it's broken, and I'm really upset. I start walking away. I'm hitting the power button, and it turns back on. I'm just like, oh, man, okay, well, it ain't broken. And that's where I guess the memory got a little hazy, because I went around, and I think maybe I went around one loop, nothing happened, and it was on the second loop after this, it powers down again. And I thought, well, that's weird because I'm standing in the same spot. And I chalked it off. I'm like, no, come on, no way, right? Whatever, dude, it's all in your head. It's just, I'm thinking, interference from something. Back in the day, we still had the radio towers nearby. I'm going through this stuff in my head. I'm like, whatever, but it ain't turning on. And I'm like, well, it turned on last time I walked away. And I start walking away, and of course it turns back on. And I went around for another loop, and that's when it actually powered down again. And I thought, okay, now this is not a coincidence. So I went over and said, hey, George, this is going on. I explained to him, and of course he gives me the yeah routine, like he's not believing. And I'm trying to explain to him, and he's just not understanding, that this shouldn't be happening. It's not like you're just losing power. It's going like you slid this. It isn't like you tap it. You have to slide this thing back to get it to power down for the contacts inside to connect. So it's not like, even if you bump the camera, it's not going to do anything. And he's just not getting it. I'm like, I want you to take a photograph next time this happens. Okay, yeah, sure. And I'm thinking, and I'm pissed off. And so I'm like, well, I'll just do it right now because I'm confident it's going to happen again. So I turn on the camera when I'm near him. And where we're standing at the time is probably more like almost dead center with the cemetery, but just a little bit south. Give you a basic average idea. And so I start walking towards this zone, and it started happening again. And that's when I started yelling to him, take the picture. And he's like, huh? I'm like, take the picture, And he does take 2 pictures. As far as how long it takes for the automatic, cameras to wind to the next frame, and he takes another one. Nothing particularly happened else that night. So anyway, so we end the night at some point, and he gets the film developed, and then he gives me a phone call. He's like, hey, remember that night? I need you to, you should probably come over and take a look at this. Well, what do you got? He goes, I can't really describe it. You come over here and take a look at these pictures. So I go over to his house, and he shows these 2 shots. One shows just me standing there. And then he goes, look at this other one. And I do remember him taking 2. And I'm like, okay, what is this? And I got him, and I'm comparing them. And there is like something different about, these photos. There's something, looks like something standing by me in a robe. Even at the time of just seeing a basic, picture of my hand was like, yeah, I see something that looks like like somebody in a robe. What the hell is this? And unfortunately, though, especially given how I like to keep track of stuff out here, at one point down the road in history, George had just decided to hand off all these photos and whatever he had left over, including the negatives of that night and some of the other stuff I guess he had or something. And unfortunately, I don't have the negative, and I don't know why it's not in the collection. I didn't go and reprint every negative, but just using an eye loop, it looks like, no, this negative isn't there. Now, all these are stored at in a remote location, no longer in my possession, so maybe I'll revisit and see what I can find. But based on George's website back in the day, because he decided he was going to put a University of Illinois webpage up, that's what he had free access to, and that's where it got kind of popular with the Grove, because there was very little information at the time, and how people even got in contact with me through him. And so here are these photos. Now here it is with me just standing there holding the camera. I don't have the comparison shot. That's what kind of even bothers me too. I'd love to give you a view of the before and after kind of thing. You know, something there, something not there. But this is all I got based on George's material, what he has, what I was able to get from his website. So there's something there. There's a little discrepancy, and George kind of you know, try to do his outlines and doing some zooming in and whatever he did back in the day for that website. Now, you know, you could dismiss the picture. To me, it's like almost the equivalent of, hey, do you see the face in the trees? Do you see the face in the weeds? And I blow that stuff off a lot. I'm like, you need more to it. I mean, I'll ask you got a backstory or something like that. Well, this one does have a backstory, right? So you can't really dismiss the repeatability of the camera powering down only in one spot. And by the way, the camera's never done that after that. It didn't do it before that. It's only happened here at the cemetery. You know, it's pretty odd. Now, I did save those VHS tapes back in the day when I started converting everything over to digital. You know, years later, I decided to at least run the audio portion through some audio spectrograms, and nothing ever showed up. You don't see anything on the video. Everything sounds fine. It's just an abnormal power shutdown that keeps happening. You know, what would cause that? What would have the power to do that? That kind of thing. I don't want to speculate on it. I just want to kind of give you the timeline of events and what was captured and what was going on. What else am I missing? I don't think I'm really missing anything. Except for the following day, I decided to come back. And at that time, I was one of the only people within my group of friends that actually own a cell phone. Came back to the cemetery, made a phone call about a dug-up grave, and then this cop comes back there, and then he unholstered his gun, pulled it out of the holster a little bit, still had his hand on the side, you know, on the gun, but had it unholstered, and he's just kind of like, "What are you doing?" You know, and like, hey, you know, I'm the one who called it in, and called what in? And I'm pointing through the fence, that grave over there, and well, what are you doing in there? And like, I just saw it through the fence, and you know, back then I was just kind of like intimidated. You know, now we know we can go in there; it's just fine. But there was actually a silver ceremonial shovel in the hole. Now this is back before I carried a pocket camera. I didn't bring my video camera in with me. I didn't have a cell phone that had a camera in it. It just didn't exist. I wish I would have grabbed a photo of that. It was really weird. The cop just took the shovel and walked off with it, but it was like perfectly clean, like somebody came back the next day and just set it in the hole. Yeah, oddness of the Grove, right? Anyway, so that's for that particular night. I just found that really odd how George just showed up and we went through this weird experience. And, I'll speculate later on some things. But I just wanted to kind of get on the record the timeline of events with that sort of stuff. And for what it's worth, also, the camera was a Panasonic VHS Reporter. That's the brand name. Well, until next time.